Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rarely Typical Season 2. And I am your host, Jerry Langan. I am so excited to be back, guys. I am so thankful for all of the outpouring of love and support that you guys showed season 1. I hated to end it after just 10 episodes, but I also wanted to make sure that I was honoring who I am outside of this space and outside of this tiny box and this little profile on a small corner of the internet. I just want to be present also at home with my family and remember who I am outside of my illness. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. And I can't wait to dive into this subject with you. It is something that is near and dear to my heart, a very big cornerstone of how I run my page, how I run my business, and pretty much how I want you guys to remember to live your lives with a chronic illness. There's a lot of things that I want to talk about when it comes to the subject of just honoring who you are outside of your illness. There are so many nuances that come with being diagnosed with a chronic illness in life. I was a whole person before I was diagnosed, and I think that that person gets lost a lot in the up and down and the roller coaster of what life with a chronic illness looks like. And it is so difficult sometimes to separate who I am and what this chronic illness is. And I guess when I'm trying to break it down, I think about like oil and water, right? I think about how it looks when you combine oil to water, they separate and they're not ever really combined, but you can put them in the same container and they can exist simultaneously. And I think that that actually shows a really good picture of what life with a chronic illness looks like, especially if you were not born with one. And I cannot speak to that. I wasn't born with this illness, but I was diagnosed at a later age. So life looks a lot different for me than it did pre diagnosis. And I want to honor the person that I was before I was diagnosed, but also living in my 20s and the age that I was, the becoming that I was doing. I think that it was such a pivotal point in my life anyway. And I think in your 20s, it's always some sort of pivotal moment, right? You're always learning, you're figuring out who you are, you're figuring out who you want to be, you're figuring out your career and marriage and who you want to marry and, where you want to live, what do you want to do, and all of those things make living in general just difficult. And so the age at which I was diagnosed, I think plays a huge factor in remembering who I was because I also feel like I don't know who that girl was. She was very insecure. She did not know what she wanted to do with her life. She had a picture of what her life looked like, but she was also really scared. And I think that by honoring who I was, I can be thankful for where I am, and where I am now might not recognize who that girl was, but that girl was me at one point, and I have to be thankful for her because she did get me to where I am today. The age at which I was when I was diagnosed was really important because it was different in how I would define my life had I been diagnosed when I was younger or had I been diagnosed in my 40s. Because of the age that I was still defining my life by how much sleep I was getting, how much money I was making at work. I was defining my life by career trajectory and where Jason and I would live after we got married and, who my friends were, what I was going to do with my life, what the future looked like. And that was age appropriate, right? That was age appropriate. It was seasonal appropriate because that was how I defined my life. So then after I was diagnosed, everything changed and the trajectory changed. The season of my life changed. And then the way I defined my life changed because now chronic illness was defining my life for me. It took over. It was a beast that was pretty much indestructible. And I was defining my life by my chronic illness. It turned my whole world upside down and it essentially took everything that I knew and it made me question what I knew about me because it consumed all my thoughts. It was like when you start planning a wedding, you and your soon to be spouse only talk about your wedding. You talk about the colors and the bridesmaids and the groomsmen and the honeymoon and the photographer. And then at one point during our wedding planning, I looked at Jason and I said, "What did we talk about before we got engaged?" And I feel like that's what it looked like when I got diagnosed with a chronic illness. I started thinking about doctor's appointments and medications and pump changes and dressing changes and how I was feeling and all of these things that we are so used to thinking about with a chronic illness started defining me and started defining how I defined my life. And I don't feel like that is an appropriate place. And I feel like most of that is like transference, right? You have redefined who you are based off of a situation that has happened to you. But you are not defined by the events that happen in your life. You are defined by who you are at your core and in your spirit and in your soul. And I think that when we get diagnosed with a chronic illness, because all of those thoughts consume our life, it's really hard to look back at a time pre diagnosis and think, what did I think about? What did I care about pre diagnosis? And why was I so worried? Why was I so upset about getting left out? Or why was I so upset when someone was upset with me? Because there is so much more to life now that I've been diagnosed with this chronic illness. And for me, because PAH is a progressive illness, it makes me look at my life as a whole and say, sometimes those things really don't matter the way that we weigh them. Sometimes we give weight to stuff because we don't know any different. And now that I have been diagnosed with a chronic illness, I weigh things differently. Like the things that used to bother me and weighed so much and were so heavy are really just blips in my memory now because I have so much more that I should be worried about. And yes, those things like blood work and medication and doctor's appointments, those do consume a lot of my thoughts. Don't get me wrong. I think about it pretty much nonstop, but I don't let that define me. It's just another task, another part of my day. And I've had to make a lot of adjustment, but it's an adjustment. Those doctor's appointments do not define who I am. That blood work does not define who I am. Those test results do not define who I am. They might define my chronic illness. They might label my chronic illness as severe or mild or moderate, but it does not define who I am as a person. And I want you guys to remember that. I want you guys to think about who you were before you were diagnosed. I want you to think about who your friends say you are. If you were to sit down and talk to 3 or 4 of your closest friends, what would they say about you? And I have some really special letters that my friends wrote for me. And I'm going to read you a little clip of them and let you know what my friends say about me so that you can also ask your friends to maybe write you a letter for your next diagnosed anniversary so that you can remember who you are outside of your illness. So these letters are really special to me, and I have actually not read them out loud on a public platform yet. So I just am going to give you a small clip of them, but I'm going to try my best to not get emotional because I'm not confident that I won't get through some of these without crying. I'm definitely not going to read them all because the last time I did, I just sat and sobbed. But I will give you a little snippet of what the people closest in my life tell me who I am, and it helps me remember sometimes when I am struggling with remembering who I am. These letters are so precious to me because they always do their best to remind me that I am more than this illness. My husband called me a stone cold fox. Sarah said, while others would let these circumstances consume them and dictate their lives, you chose to have hope. Your friendship means the world to me for a number of reasons. Simply being around you and being a small part of your journey has made a huge impact on my life. Jordan said, you are a rare find. She also said, keep shining your light and fighting your fight, you good and faithful servant. Jody said, she makes things happen. She's a friend that goes above and beyond. She puts in the work and she knows how important meaningful friendships are. She's an incredibly tough person considering all that she's been through, and she doesn't let anything stop her. She's honest. She's an amazing mom and wife. Olivia said, you're not just a fighter, You're a leader and an advocate and a guiding light to so many others facing chronic illness. She also said, I hope you know how much you amaze me. You've been given a path that no one would willingly choose, yet you walk it with a fierce spirit that is nothing less than awe inspiring. So I'm sharing these very important letters to me because sometimes I feel like when we're down in the dumps, when we get bad news, when all we can focus on is the chronic illness that surrounds us, that engulfs our entire existence, you forget that you are somebody outside of your illness. You forget that you are a whole person and that your chronic illness is just a very minuscule part of who you are. It definitely is part of your being, but it does not mean that it's part of you. It's like the oil and the water. It coexists simultaneously with who you are living your life, but I don't believe that it actually mixes with who we are. I do not think that you should be defining your life with a chronic illness. I don't think that you should be defining who you are by your chronic illness. When I say I have pulmonary hypertension does not have me. And do not make a mistake and do not discredit the fact that I struggle every day. Do not discredit the fact that I will sit on my bathroom floor sometimes and just cry. And there are days when it's very overwhelming and I definitely forget who I am. But there's so much goodness around me that reminds me that that is not who I am, that it's just one thing that has happened to me. And I just want you guys to know that and to feel that deep in your soul that you are more than your chronic illness and that you should not be defining who you are by your disease. So let's give practical advice because that is what I love about podcasts. That's what I love about deep conversations. I love the ability to take something practical away from them. And so I always want to give you guys practical advice. I know that you can sit there and you can say, you should not let your chronic illness define you. And you guys could walk away from this podcast and I could end it right there. And you could walk away and you could think, that's awesome. But then, like, how do I do that? And it doesn't give you any practical advice to take it away by me just telling you. So I want to give you a little bit of application for that. First of all, I want you to honor who you are. I want you to honor who you are outside of your illness. Who are you? What is your character? Where is your heart? Where is your soul? Where does your mind go when it wanders? I want you to ask your closest three friends, your closest family members, and say, who do you think I am? If you were struggling with that question, that is a question that I cannot answer for you. And I wish that I could give you more than that. But the people around you, the people that are closest to you, should be able to tell you who they believe you are. And I promise you that none of their definitions are going to be, you are this condition, because that is not you. Okay, so how do I honor who I am? Things that I work on. I practice a lot of self care. I take a lot of breaks. And if you follow me on social media, you know that I take the whole month of December off. This podcast, I took a whole month off just so that I can remember to honor who I am outside of this disease space. I think being stuck in this disease space sometimes and constantly talking about my condition and chronic illness as a whole can be draining. And so I take a step back. I take a break. I focus on my family. I focus on my kids. I focus on my marriage. I focus on trying to remember the things that bring me joy outside of this small corner of the internet. I try to remember that there is a whole life that I'm literally living, and I have to actually be present in it if I want anything from it. It is a give and take. You can only get out of life what you put in, and you don't just receive the living part of life. You can just walk through life. That's definitely easy to do. It's definitely things that people with a chronic illness often do is they just walk through life and they get by day by day. And I do want to hold space for that. And I know that there are people that are really struggling, but I also know that you can make adjustments and that you can still do things that make you happy, even if they have to be adjusted. And I don't feel like you should limit yourself to only doing things within your comfort zone. There's no growth without being uncomfortable. And sometimes we have to put ourselves through uncomfortable situations in order to grow and in order to feel like we're really living life. There has never been a time that's not true. There has definitely been times that I have said yes to things that I get into and I think I really wish I'd said no. But in hindsight, I always am thankful that I went, or I'm thankful that I tried at least. I step back a lot. I take a lot of breaks. I take a lot of time to myself and I remember to water my own grass. I am a very extroverted person and I love to spend time with my friends. I love to be out and doing things. I am definitely in a season of busyness and I'm trying to also remember to be still. And that is something that I'm personally working on anyway, is being still so that I can remember that the busyness doesn't define me either. And it's definitely something that I struggle with. It's definitely something that I have a hard time saying, "Oh, you deserve the rest today," or "You need to take a rest today." Because if I don't listen to my body when it tells me I need rest, it will scream at me and force me to take rest. So I try to be proactive. I try to give my body rest before it asks for it. And that's a form of self-care. That's a form of honoring who I am, knowing my limitations. Knowing your limitations is a huge part of knowing who you are and having self-awareness. I think that people with a chronic illness often have such great body awareness. Like I have such great awareness of my body because I am now hyper focused on how it's doing, how it feels, whether or not somebody's going to bump me, like all of those things. But I think that sometimes because chronic illness can be such a beast that it overshadows that self awareness. And I think self awareness is the key to all of this honoring who you are thing. I think that self awareness is so critical in remembering all of the important things about us and knowing that when you're not saying kind things to yourself, knowing that you're now having negative self talk is all self awareness. The way you talk to yourself in your head reflects how you feel about yourself. And we often talk negatively in our heads without even realizing it. Like, oh, that was stupid. I shouldn't have done that. Or, oh, I shouldn't have said that. And then you sit there and you think about it and you're like, oh, that was stupid. Why did I say that? Well, that's negative self talk. So sometimes I have to practice that. I have to say in my head positive things to myself. And it actually is really hard. You have to be very proactive and you have to be very intentional to do it in order to eventually have it become habit, right? You have to do things a certain amount of time before it becomes a habit. So I will say Bible verses to myself. And if you are new here, I love the Bible. I love Jesus. And I know that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I know that I'm called God's masterpiece. I know that I am chosen by God, that I am loved, and that I am holy, and that I am called a saint, and that He has good plans for me, plans to prosper me and not harm me, and plans to give me a hope and a future. And those are things that I have to say to myself all the time. But if you are not religious and if that's not your thing, tell yourself, say, I'm a good person. I'm a good mom. I'm a good wife. I'm a good friend. I'm a good daughter. I am good. I am good is a whole sentence. I'm not good because I'm living with my chronic illness. I'm not good because I feel good today. I am good, period. And I think that the periods at the end of our sentences are so important when we are talking to ourselves because it's so often that you want to add that comma and then the second part of the sentence is negative. Don't do that. Say, I am good. I am a good mom, period. I am a good spouse, period. And then repeat those things to yourself. I do think that that's practical advice is to continue to do positive self talk and not only talk negative to yourself. Because when we get in our heads about who we are and we tell ourselves all of these negative things, then of course, the only thing that can overtake your thoughts is this chronic illness that's also negative. Negative thoughts have a very big tendency to impact everything around us. And so, if you can give yourself any sort of positivity, it all starts in here. It's all starts inside of your head, and everything else flows from where you feel like in your heart who you are. So I want to round this out by saying I do believe that you are a whole person outside of your chronic illness. I know that your illness takes a lot from you. I feel that every day, all the time. I feel like this chronic illness takes over my life sometimes, but it is not my life. It is not my whole life. It is definitely a very big part of my life, but it is not who I am and it does not define me. So I want you guys to remember that today. I'm so thankful that you guys are back for season 2 and I'm so excited about season 2. The next person on my podcast is my best friend, Livia, and she is also going to be talking about mental health and we're going to be talking about coping strategies that you can have if you are struggling with your mental health, because that's something that everybody with a chronic illness definitely struggles with. I have a lot planned for this upcoming season. I am so excited that you guys are back. I'm so excited that I'm back. Thank you guys for supporting this podcast. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to me talk. Thank you for liking the sound of my voice. I hope that you like it. I hope that you subscribe. I hope that you keep following this podcast. And I will see you guys next time.